Welcome back to another episode of Out of Bounds on the Boomer Bus channel. I'm your host, Terry, and today doing the episode reflecting on the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. A book that came out some time ago, but just recently came across for me. It was actually assigned to me for a class. It all kind of happened at once. I heard the name, or at least saw the name in relation to the new Superman movie and being announced as one of the writers for a potential reboot. And I was like, okay. And then in the articles, it just talked about his work on the Black Panther reboot series in the comics. And so I was like, okay, so comic writer. But then I saw this in class and I'm like, wait, what? He also writes, like, you know, is he a researcher? What is he? And then so we get this book and I'm in a class specifically about doctoral research. And I started reading it and I was confused. I was like, this isn't a research book. This seems different. And so just having to read that, and from there stumbling through some of the interviews just to kind of see what he's talking about and what he's about, and then finding out there's an HBO Max, or I should say an HBO special that's on HBO Max right now, where it's kind of a live visual retelling of his book Between the World and Me. And so just really going down the rabbit hole, but going through it again, like I definitely had some thoughts going through it the first time, but obviously going through again and really seeing it in a different context now that I know what it's about and who it's coming from. And there's just a lot of thoughts. I just feel like, you know, time to reflect. We talk a lot and it's always impactful for me, but I wouldn't say it's refreshing or new when I come across these type of works or discussions or whatnot, because I've been talking about it for a long time, been reflecting on these things for a long time. But this is the next in the line of my literature and my, you know, repertoire. And I think it's an important one and a unique one to reflect on, even though the concepts and themes are essential. And I think, really connect to a lot of the things we've been talking about over the past year and even longer than that. It's something that I thought just had a unique voice to it. And so just kind of going through and making those connections to me. I mean, this isn't something new for me. I talk about the issues of the day on this preferred show. And I always bring my own self into the work that I do, whatever it is I'm talking about, whether it be sports or normal things. So, starting off with this conversation, kind of this retelling about how was the first night, I guess, that he's saying his son realized kind of what America is not his words but my words, and that was saying that he was waiting for the conviction of the killers. And I believe, I don't even remember, and I talked about this before, that's part of the problem, so many names, but his son was waiting for the conviction to, you know, see if what was going to happen to the people that had killed unarmed black person, and they were acquitted essentially. And so his son was upset, and he talked about how he heard him crying in there, and after 5 minutes or so he came in, but he didn't tell him it was okay because he didn't believe it would be okay. He don't ever believe it'll be okay. And he kind of talked about, this is your country, this is your world. And, you know, you now understand that, basically you got to protect the black body. And that is a discussion from this book that's been had many places and that we still continue today. And so, I mean, obviously that's a direct connection to what a lot of high profile issues right now with police brutality, especially in terms of race. And so, I think that's a very salient and obvious point that people can grasp onto. And I don't know that I need to dig super far into that. We've talked about those things a lot. If you don't really understand those conversations by now, there's always time to learn. So dig into that, but it's a very big point. But I thought it was interesting talking about it from the eyes of his son. And this whole book is kind of like I wouldn't say a memoir, but it's kind of like a letter to his son. And it's talking about all these things that he wants to pass on to him. And I was talking with somebody and I was like, that's what really made this unique to me. Because if you just look at it in its, composition, it seems like it's just droning on about random things without, it's like 3 chapters. So there's not a lot of headings, a lot of this. It's just a lot of talking. But when it's framed in the sense of talking to his son, like having a heart to heart, one of those conversations, it feels more natural. It feels like conversation, and you accept the way that it continues on. And it makes it powerful because it's framed not just here's my thoughts, but here's what I have to tell my son, and here's what I hope he takes from it. And so I thought that was a powerful frame, and it reminds me a lot, and I'll probably mention this again later. It's just that I often think, as I'm like 9 days away from my birthday at this point, and I often think about as I get older, and I've thought about this since I was a junior in college, about parenthood and what that means. And I think it's always been scary to me, but I think it was scary in a different way when I was young. It was very much being scared of my own ability to provide, to be a good father. And not only that, but my ability to ruin a child. I thought so much about parenthood and how childhood development is essential at the core of all of us, and how one wrong turn or one wrong thing or experience or moment could really scar deeply a child and put them on a course. Not to say that it's all bad, but with the good and the potential to foster and nurture someone comes that also capability to do great harm. And some people might think about being a president or CEO or a leader in the military and say, well, I got hundreds, thousands, millions of lives to worry about. You talking about just one. And I always have to say, how many is enough? I think one's enough. One person can have a profound effect on the world, and your ability to take that away is scary. But as I transition more into my I don't know what I guess technically I'm getting middle-aged now, but as I transition into being later in my life, the fear is not so much of my capability to be a good father. I believe I'm confident in that. I believe I'm confident in what I want to pass on and how to do it. What my fear is the world. And that's not new to any parent, to be scared that you can't protect and provide for your child. And you can't, I should say you can't do it to a level that's going to shield them from everything. And that's where the fear comes in. And so the framing of this book really speaks to me when it's coming from father to son. And obviously that's directly tied to my own, my own makeup. I am a male. I obviously can't have a daughter, but I think about having a son, especially how tough that would be. And again, it's not about my ability. It's about what would the world do to my son, and what it would mean to see my son figure out how ugly this world is. And again, bringing him into it is my choice. And so, it's your responsibility, and it's scary. So that definitely connects home. Then Coates starts to talk about growing up. He grew up in West Baltimore. Obviously, I didn't grow up there, but a lot of similarities, and a lot of our stories, as much as we like to rep our towns and our cities and our blocks and all that, a lot of our stories in the African American experience, I think it resonates where, the same principles, whether it's Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, New York, Mississippi, Alabama, whatever, it resonates some of those same concepts. And so he starts to talk about a number of things, but mainly one thing that hit me was the idea of the people, or the young men in the street, and the rules of the street, as far as if someone does this, you gotta run, you gotta get back home, go get your weapon, or go get some more, go get your gun, go get your cousins, or as people call them, your cousins, and you gotta go meet them back, and you gotta fight it out too. Otherwise, you lost that reputation or whatnot. But so there's this idea of fighting. He talked about the fighting weather. And we all know too well in Chicago, when it gets warm out, the murder rate goes up. So he's talking about fighting, the rules of fighting, the rules of not messing with certain people because of who their family are, the rules of making sure you're not caught alone. He does it in a more poetic way, but talking about being caught lacking, as they used to say. And so all those different things in which you are constantly having to dodge something. And there's a significant discussion and chunk about the other kids on the streets, but then you extend that to, okay, once I'm past them, now I got to worry about the cops on my way to school, and hopefully nothing happens to and from school with the cops. And then if I make past the cops, I got to go to the actual school, where I got to worry about teachers and security guards or whoever that are also what feels like aimed against you. And so this just constant state of having to be on guard. And I absolutely resonate with that. I mean, it's something that you understand at a very young age. Unfortunately, it's something that as African American Black people, we have to teach that. And there's definitely debate about not exposing your kids to that type of negativity, not pointing it out, letting them be innocent, letting them live their youth. And that's fine when you're sitting in the suburb. That's fine when you got money and you feel like you have the means to protect them in that sense. But when you're talking about growing up in places where, again, as Coach says, our errors are more costly, they have greater consequence. You can't afford to have a child in this world that don't understand. And so he talked in vivid detail at some points about being beat and being, disciplined about the parents. And at one point he was talking about how Black parents love their children and how it almost feels like they rather kill them themselves than to lose them to the street. And it's the same thing. I mean, definitely some of the stuff he said, it resonates with me as far as if you mess up, or if, just stuff parents say, if you go out there and get hit by a car, and I think he said this too, if you get out there hit by a car and die, I'm gonna bring you back to life, kill you myself. It's just because that's the ultimate price, is that. And the ultimate price, obviously, for all of us is death, but the ultimate price for us is always around every corner. And it's not every once in a while. It's all the time. And so parents have to prepare their kids for that. And so he talks again about growing up. But one thing that really stood out to me was how he talked about, and I never want to be the person like fully quote or hold the book here. I do wish I kind of wrote some of the stuff down, but I'd rather say it the way it hit me. He talked about seeing at a young age that, all that holding the gun and pointing it at other people or getting into those fights or threatening other people in the block, it was insecurity. It wasn't malice, really. It wasn't all that. I mean, I think one of the things I definitely believe is behind all anger is fear. And so it wasn't malice. It wasn't evilness that he saw. What he saw is fear, and he saw hurt in those kids because they knew, like all of us knew, even if it's not explicit, we know that we don't have that control, that we're not in control or in charge of our bodies, as Coates says, and that anything that you can do to kind of feel like you have that control becomes necessary when you're living in environments like that. And so you think about what they would call our loud fashion sense over the years, playing the music out loud, or just being very visible, or having the violence within each other, because we know that when it comes to the bigger systems, we don't have the ability to fight them. I remember one part I really liked, because he was talking about getting your gun and getting your cousins, and he was saying basically like these kids live this life until they grow up and they have to deal with the real world, and they realize that America has guns and cousins too, but they got a lot more. And that line stuck out to me so much, but it's true. It really spoke to me to see some of the things that I've seen, the people I've seen. I just see it as hurt. I see it as pain. Obviously that can manifest in violent ways, and there's a lot of people that, they're murderers, they're killers, they're criminals. There's no forgiveness. But to me, I think, none of that stuff is bred, or I should say none of that stuff is just natural. It's not just sitting there once you're born. That stuff is bred through the environment, through the things that you see, the things that you go through, the circumstances, and I'll talk to this point a little bit later, but this idea that your reality is just your reality, or your reality is all reality, and whether that's how things are done on your block, your city, or your country. So to sit here, because there's a lot of people that will sit here and say those conditions don't change anything, or they don't affect as much as people try to say, like you can rise above the pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality. And I don't know if that's true, especially as you go outside of our society. When you talk about places where people grow up without clean running water, places where people grow up where there's war outside, guns going off while they're supposed to be in school, places growing up where people might have to hunt live food, or all the things that we take for granted. But at the same time, to them, that's normal. That's their life. And so to sit here and say that our reality is the reality is just not true. And so to think that what you grow up believing is normal and correct doesn't affect the way you live, I can't agree with that. And so it jumps further. He talks a lot about school, and I'd be here all day if I talked about the school system. Obviously, I'm not exactly in line with Coates on that one, but he talked about how he never felt like that was the place for him. And he did a lot of learning on his own, which I think is good too. A lot of reading. And one of the things that kind of comes through, and I'll mention again, is that it wasn't like a typical story that you will see being published, or not published, but promoted through the media, where it's like, oh, I don't got no father, or I got no parents, or I'm in the gang, or I dropped out of school, or any of that. Like, no, it was what some people might call a more privileged life, even though he was living that. Coates still was very smart. He had parents that had jobs that were a little more higher prestige. And he talked about his family, a lot of his family working at Howard, and that's how Howard University, and how he got connected to it, and how he had to read a lot. Like, his parents would push him to read so he could find answers. They wouldn't give him answers. And he talked about how his grandma made him like write down, and when he got in trouble or whatever, she would, instead of like talking, she would make him write down like what he did, why he did it, and how he would, make sure he wouldn't do it again, or how he'll adjust in the future. And how she really put him in that mindset to question things and to really be able to articulate and frame things. And so that's what, in some standards, very privileged, but still facing a lot of the same issues that connects to us all. So then you fast forward, even with his love-hate, or I guess hate relationship with school, he goes to Howard University. And this is probably one of the more vivid parts of the book, where he talks about the Mecca and Howard University being separate, basically saying that Howard University is concerned with, numbers. That's the machine, that's the organization. But the Mecca, which is the nickname for Howard, that's more about the people, the energy, the vibe, the ideal, I would say, the representation. Now, again, I work in education. I worked for about 5 years doing college and career stuff with high school students. So I've been to a lot of campuses, a lot of HBCUs. Haven't been to Howard, but I felt what he said, but really putting it in his shoes, from being that young age and stepping there, at least from where he was coming from, where he was always reading and questioning, the truth about our people. It was really vivid the way he painted that picture, but basically saying what I think a lot of us hear and understand at some point in our life, hopefully, that us as African American, as Black people, we're always told what Black is, and we learn what Black is in relation again to what's around us. But at some point, hopefully, you have a moment where your reality clashes and you see that it's much more than you ever thought it was. And that was his moment at the Mecca, where he saw all types of Black, and say all the spectrum of Black, all the different cultures, shapes, sizes, all the different ways you can be Black, all jammed into this one place, this historical place where you stand on the foundation of a lot of amazing things that happen, that produce a lot of amazing people. But then you have all that energy and consciousness currently, and you're part of something bigger. Now, as much as I think he talks warmly about Howard, I still don't think he's like beholden to his identity of Howard. But I think, as he talks about, it's a very informative part of his time. And again, I haven't been there, but I know what the HBCU energy feels like. But again, it speaks to a larger point. We're not a monolith. It speaks to School Days from Spike Lee, where you see that, yes, we all Black, we're all African American, labeled as Black in this country, but we're all not the same. We're going to think differently, have different motivations. We're not always going to be united on the same goals and agendas. We're not going to always express ourselves in certain ways. And it is it's a powerful point, especially for our young people to understand that, because it took me a long time to understand that. And I do think that, and I learned some of that in college, but I do think going to a predominantly white institute, that wasn't as immediate to me. What was more immediate is that they're different type of white people. But for me, understanding, I would say early on, I mean, definitely the world that you're around in this country is going to shape your thoughts into boxes, one way or the other. Even though I understood people were individuals, you still had certain boxes, stereotypes. And what I learned in college, I was like, man, there's so many different types, just what Ta-Nehisi was describing. And I said, well, if that's like that for white people, that has to be like that for us. And so, again, I don't think I really understood it until I was older and was out into the world. But it's a very important point that we all get to, that we realize, we say it all the time. People that aren't black might hear this all the time from us. Like, you ain't black, or you ain't really black. And I've said for a long time, not a long time, but probably 5, 6, 7 years or so, black and white is about culture. And more accurately nowadays, I realize it's about race and politics. That's the history of that race. But the way we use it and employ it in everyday, conversations, it's about culture. When we say do it the black way, or, oh, you talking white, we're talking about culture. We're talking about what we've come to know. Not at all really about anything inherent about us or our skin tone. What we're talking about is what we've come to know as culture. When they say, oh, that white boy act black, or you act, or that black dude act white, you're Oreo, whatever, you're a wigger. All these things come from us using it as culture, is the way I always saw it. And so if you peel back that layer, instead of just saying, oh, they all black, you realize, yes, they're African American, but they all have their own different thing. And that's the hardest thing to do in this world, not just America, is to see people as individuals. It just makes it so much harder, but that's honestly the truth at the end of the day. But I would say, not similar to other people, Coates doesn't really paint this beautiful picture of higher education or education in general as a beacon. Like, I would say education, but not in a formal way, informal education. He read a lot. That's how he learned a lot of things. He wrote, he studied other stuff, and he had access to that because of Howard, but it wasn't the formal structure education that he said really made him grow. And so when you see a lot of these stories, especially about African Americans, education usually plays some big point, positive point, I should say. And it was transformational for him, but it wasn't because of education in his point of view. Now, I would argue, and I think he argued greatly, that is one of the big parts of the college experience or the higher education, is the interactions that you wouldn't have if you weren't there, and then access to some resources that you wouldn't have if you weren't there. I would argue that education is bigger than just the classroom or the buildings. It is the gathering of people. And so I think he highlights that, but he doesn't credit education for, his any of that development. And so there's a lot there, but I won't go down that road. I think more importantly was this idea of seeing that not only is black is beautiful, but black is versatile. And so that was and he talked about kind of the 3 different times that he fell in love and all that. And I think there's definitely discussion there, but I won't harp on that. So then he goes forward after he has his child. They're living in New York. He's, struggling to make it as a writer, trying to make ends meet, all that different things. And he talked about New York kind of being like his own Mecca. He was saying like, but not a mecca for just black people, but culture in general. And I hear that a lot. I haven't been to New York, but I hear that a lot about just all the diversity that's there in this one place. And so, starting to again expand your worldview is kind of one of the bigger themes. He started to see more and understand his thoughts in a different way as he saw people living differently than what he was used to. And so he goes to one point where they went to, he took his son to see a play, and he was leaving with her, and this white lady pushed past him, and he reacted strongly. And it brings up so much, but again, he reacts strongly. And then a white guy comes to her defense. And then some other white people, kind of crowd up and back him up. And the white guy gets in his face, and Coates pushes him back. And the guy said, "I could have you arrested." And Coates talks about how all the West Baltimore was coming back and all that stuff. And he was talking about how that lady wouldn't have done that in the part of New York where he lives. She definitely wouldn't did that in West Baltimore, because she would know, or at least feel, that there was a penalty for acting like that. And he said, but he forgot he wasn't there. He said he forgot the rules. And he talks a lot about the rules in his youth, the rules that you got to go by in the street so that you don't get killed. Basically, the rule, you talk about the rules of the street. You talk about certain things you don't do, how to survive. And what he realized is the rules, you still got to follow the rules. Even if you're not in the streets, it's just a different set of rules. And so, again, he mentions how he was ashamed, not because, how he acted, but he was ashamed that he forgot the rules and made an error. And the error for us is more costly. And he talked about how the white man saying, "I can have you arrested," was him saying that I can take your body away from you. And that one of the earliest memories your child will have of his father is him being beaten and broken or taken by the police. And that basically he realized, I would say realized, but remembered that the stakes are higher, especially with his son, and that we have to be more careful because they won't regard us in the same type of respect as they will other people. And so obviously there's a lot there, and that's part of what I talked about, the fear of having to be a parent to African American child. Well, he's going to be part, or he or she will be part African American, at least. And so, but what that means, what that skin tone brings to us in terms of this country. And so, and there was also a line talking about how walking down the street and trying to stay out the way, but like having white parents and their white kids taking up the whole sidewalk with their tricycle or their strollers or whatever, and they don't have any of that type of fear. They don't have any inclination to stay out the way. And you see this a lot. We talked about the white woman feeling like she could push past him, like his son, like it was an obstacle, not respecting his body, his space that he was occupying. And I do think, I would say I know, obviously, it's not every person's intention this way. And honestly, it might not even been her intention. She might be rude to everybody that way. And so I know that sometimes when we get into these stories, it paints a broad picture. And I don't think the point of it is to say all white people are like this, or this is what all white people are thinking, but more so what the message that's being sent to us over time with all these different things. Some people call microaggressions. I don't like that word, but what people are sending to us over time, the message that's being sent with all these different things that is done, is that they don't care about us, and they're not scared to be in the way like we are, because they don't feel they're in the way. They feel entitled And so it is very powerful imagery and very powerful stuff to talk about that. And then one of the, well, I guess two parts, which really kind of connect. He talks about this trip to Paris. He said that his wife went, she grew up in a family that was more well-traveled, that wasn't new to her. This was his first time getting a passport, going out of the country. And he talked about how, he made excuses before, how he was afraid because of the language, whatever, but he did it. And he paints this picture again of just being in a different world. He talks throughout the book about a different world and a different cosmic planet where life wasn't the same as he did, where people didn't grow up being scared to go to school or, have to run from their lives or worry about if the cops pull up. He talked about this other world that he always felt was out there. He equates that to the TV and what you saw on TV with the TV shows about white suburbia, but he talks about that in a very real sense. And so he talks about going to Paris and kind of feeling like he's in that other world where people aren't looking at him the way they look at him in America, where people didn't treat him the way they treated him in America, where he felt like it was completely different and that he was more free and that he could live in the moment. And I've talked about that often after graduating college, where a lot of friends and whatnot, they studied abroad. And a lot of coworkers that I meet with, or former coworkers, or people I just meet, colleagues, talked about doing trips every year or talking about this. And every time I mention I've never been on a plane or out of the country, I always get bombarded. And this isn't just black people, but it's stronger from black people to say that you got to get out of the country. And one thing I do know, much like going to college, much like taking a road trip to a new city, much like going to a play for the first time, a Broadway play, much like going to Vegas or anything else, that the more you experience, the more your worldview gets expanded. And so I understood what he was talking about. And I do, even though I haven't done it myself, I've always encouraged students I work with to, if you can study abroad, or if you can do that trip, go ahead and do it. Because one thing that's become more important that I realize is that what we, again, our reality, what we've been taught, what we've been witnessed to in America is very different in other places. Places that might be as prosperous or more prosperous than us, but even places that we might think might not be as, first world. The thought process, the society, the rules are very different. And it's not that you have to go there to learn, but to see what else is possible, to open your worldview and imagination. And so that's always been a sign of prestige and wealth and all that, to travel, but it does hold a purpose. And you think about the privileged and the non-privileged, whether you think about that in terms of minorities versus the white, the white population, which is much more likely to be in the middle class or have higher socioeconomics. What do you think about it? Those terms or any terms? Think about them and what that means as a child growing up to see those different things. To not only enjoy the nice things in your country, but to have exposure to all the different things outside of your country. It opens up your imagination. And so, as a African-American man, listening to Coates talk about his first experience hit home. And then he talked about how he came back with his son because he wanted him to experience that. He wanted him to grow up seeing more than just the block he lived on. And they did all these things. And even though as a young kid, he's running around free, it was different for Coates to see him running around free there because he felt that he actually could be free. But then he grounds it so well with reminding us, or his son, that even though they're not the person, they're not the burden, they're not the oppressed, they're not the for lack of a better term, black sheep in that country, somebody was. And he talked a little bit about history, and I don't know about their history, but he's saying everywhere you go, somebody is the one on the bottom of the totem pole. And so that really provided a great perspective. Like, I think about going abroad and stuff, and again, for the same reasons, to feel that feeling that you're not always being looked at as the difference, the other, but understanding that somebody is, and history was built on the back of somebody. And so that was an interesting perspective. And then lastly, he talks a good bit about a person that he went to school with called Prince Jones, and how just really strong his presence was, and all that. And he talks about later in their adult life where he reads a paper and sees that Prince was killed. And he was killed by the cops of PG County. I forgot what it stood for, but it was in Washington. And it was like one of the most notorious counties when it came to police brutality and killings and all that. And that this cop didn't even kill him in PG County or Washington or New York. It was down in Virginia. He followed him all the way down there. And he talked about how the cop said he feared for his life. Cop fired 16 rounds into the person's car. Said that the person was trying to hit him with the car, or Prince was trying to hit him with the car. And now he followed him because they say fit the description of this person they were looking for, who was like 6 inches shorter than him, much smaller. And he still justified that. And so he talked about how nothing happened, and that person was able to return to their job. The chief or captain, whatever, got a raise, even though they had all these FBI investigations about them in general, and nothing happened, and kind of that injustice. But we know what all that means, tying back to police brutality. But one thing that was really interesting at the end of it, he didn't say this until the end. He said that cop was black. And he said the powers that be that allowed him to go do that, they were black. The people that covered him up was black. And he talked about how that police department talked a lot about how citizens, black citizens, have voted and said that, basically safety was more important above all, and that they would be okay with them doing certain things to get the criminals and whatnot. And Coates doesn't talk about this. There's another book I'm reading currently for work, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi. And that talks about this idea of, dual consciousness, but it kind of talks about how we are programmed by our country to such an extent to think that, the American dream and the white life is so standard that some minority people, African American people, they join that side. So you talk about people that are educated, get degrees, live in the middle class, live in the suburbs, and then they look down on other African Americans that might be doing drugs or dropped out or this or that. And it gives us this mindset that a lot of white people have, and that is that it's not the product of the system, it's the individual's fault. And so they shame the individual, and then they become on kind of like on the team of the oppressors. And so that's what I kind of saw there when he's talking about this black cop that killed Prince, and these black politicians and these black people in this county that are committing these things and defending it. because they benefit off that system. They're part of the system. And this idea that, again, and I think he talked about, like, you can't run away from this history. You can't run to another country and escape it. This is our world. This is our country. This is the history of what we're built on. And so to think that, you're safe, like he said, the Mecca couldn't save Prince. Prince, as great as he grew up and all that, and making it to Howard and graduating and having a family, he still wasn't safe. And it reminds me of my own experience where I've said, I don't think I've talked about the specific thing that happened yet, but I had incident with the law. And the first thing I remember, because this is less than a year after I graduated from college, and I remember thinking, while I'm sitting in the jail cell, that degree's not tattooed on your head. The only thing that, they can't see your degree. They can't see no awards. They can't see intelligence. What they can see is the color of your skin. And while I pushed back a lot of my life about the African American, the this and that, because I said it was culture, somebody that is African American but grew up with millionaire parents in some rich suburb of California, what can they say to me, somebody from Southside Chicago? Like, we don't live the same life. How are you more akin to me than this white guy I know that grew up in the same place that I did, that probably had more hungry nights than I did? How do you understand more than he does? And while I still believe there's truth in that, what I realized at that time was that, again, you can't carry that nowhere. We think about our status symbols, but that don't matter. I remember Kanye saying, even if you in the Benz, you still a nigga in the coupe. And ADD-2, love him, always plugging. And one of his songs, he said you could get a nice house with a big backyard and a nice car. Don't get amnesia, thinking that you're not black. And I'm like, that's true. Like, that's the weight that we carry. All that stuff don't matter, because this is what they see. And when they see this, they have a license in their mind to violate us. And so, wrapping up, not wrapping the book up, but at least the parts I'm covering, he went and found Prince's mother, and he had a conversation with her. Now, Prince's mother was from the South during those sharecropping days. And she says she saw a lot of things there. She said, I'm not going to live like that, and worked her way up in different capacity to where she was very wealthy. She was in charge. I forgot exactly what unit, but she was big in the healthcare. And so she ended up becoming like in charge of one of the units, but she had money. And she said that similar to what Coates was saying, I brought my kids up to see different things, to have all the things that I didn't have. They talked about all the ski trips they took every year, about the different, camps and stuff that they attended, all these different things to enrich her kids. And she talked about, Coates asked, like, what'd you think when he, or did you want him to go to Howard, I think? And then she said, no, I wanted him to go to Yale, if not there, Princeton, if not there, Columbia, if not there, Stanford. She said he was that type of caliber of student, and she wanted him basically to aspire to that. But, he chose, and she said he was tired of being the representative. And I understood exactly what she said. She didn't go into it, but I understood what she said, understanding that, growing up, for me at least, being always honors and high student in itself is tiresome, but having to be a person of color and doing that, it's a whole added thing. And then you talk about being a minority at a predominantly white institute, and most times being the only African American or person of color or minority in the room for a class, having to always be the one to answer and feeling like you represent the whole race. So I understood, and he went to the Mecca and he saw something in that black energy that Coates saw. And he said, do you regret that he went to Howard? And she said, I regret that he's dead. And she talked about how she bought him this Jeep, had a big purple bow on it, and how happy he was for his birthday. She said it was the same Jeep that he was killed in, obviously having some guilt to that. But the biggest thing I think from that conversation was just, again, you know, she has this nice house. She's in a nice area. She did all these great things for her kids, and they still took him away. And Coates does a great job painting the picture when he's talking about, these deaths. He talks about he thinks about all of those things being spilt out of them onto the streets, you know, all those fees you pay for camps, all those swimming lessons, all those football practices, all those, awards, all those things that you've been invested in from your family, all spilled out and taken away from you right there. And so, again, that harkens back to this idea of trying to escape, go to Paris, see something different, maybe be somewhere different. This idea of education being the great equalizer, all those different things. And that's what makes this conversation so hard and very emotional for a lot of people, is that we sit here and talk about this, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, and these different ideas of what you can do to make it, you know, and all of it is just telling you to assimilate and conform to what white men have decided was the standard in this country. Oh, well, if you didn't dress like that. Oh, if your name wasn't so hard to pronounce. Oh, if you didn't have that tattoo. Oh, if you got a college degree. Oh, if you spoke differently. Oh, if you did this. And again, those are excuses. But we've seen, and we continue to say, that there's people with all of that have more degrees than the average white person, that has better English, speaks better English, I say, than average white person, but has a better vocabulary, has more money, has never had a criminal record, was not involved in anything, or if they were being respectful, and you still see them get killed. And so this conversation that is bigger than just what the person did, what did you do to get yourself killed by the cops, is the conversation they want to have. And what a lot of people are saying is that's no longer the conversation. The conversation is what is happening with the cop in what's happening with the cop to get to that point, and what's happening with the system that nobody's being held accountable for it. And so a lot of powerful themes that, again, I think speak across, age, that speak across where you live in the United States, that speak across education level, all types of things that we feel in this common experience that people label the Black experience. And I would say more accurately, African American experience as well. So a lot came from this for me. Not a whole lot new, but definitely said in a different way. And it ignites something in me every time. So if you have not checked it out, I would definitely say check out the book. After I would read the book first, and then check out the HBO Max special they did. Check out some other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there, but I think it was a very powerful thing. So anyway, that's it for me. Go down to the comment section. Let me know what you think. Share it around, get the conversation started. And thank you for going out of bounds.